So after Warhammer 40K's last big updates, let's take a look at just one strong army list that's done well for each faction in the game. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking Warhammer 40k army lists, and this one doing a big roundup of armies that have done well post-update. It's now been about 2.5 weeks since Games Workshop dropped the last balance pass. As usual, it certainly caused a fair amount of upheaval, changes to most factions in the game, though not literally all of them, and it felt like maybe the spirit of it was more to rein in just a few of the armies that seem to be running away towards the top end of the meta, as opposed to completely overturning the way that armies play. It certainly meant that the upper end of the Warhammer 40k tournament scene is far more up for grabs than it was before though, and I was interested to take a look at what had been doing well post-data slates. So far there haven't really been all that many chances for big tournaments for people to get games in, 2 main weekends of tournament data, mainly due to things winding down before Christmas. For this one though, I thought we'd take a look at the tournaments that we have had, and go through one army list for each faction in the game. Ideally looking for something that's either won a tournament or gone something like 4-1 for 4 wins and 1 loss in a grand tournament, though for a few armies that I struggled with, I went with a 3-0 one-day event win. For most of the armies I've just got the one example. For a few of them we might look in on one more briefly, and obviously I bear in mind that these don't necessarily represent the only way that you can play each army, or that this particular army is going to be the new meta thing or whatever. It's just one example of what a good player has managed to do well with, and managed to get some wins against other good players trying to do likewise. Let's get into it though, and first up we'll start with the Imperium and the Space Marines, and while there's a lot of talk about the Victrix Honor Guard at the moment, here's a Firestorm Assault Force list, played by Alexander Engelsos, going 4 wins and 1 draw at Gashhammer End of Year GT. The Salamanders maybe feel like the other Space Marine chapter besides the Ultramarines that I've seen most commonly doing well in tournaments after the updates. The Raven Guard Shadowmark Talon really seems to have fallen off, perhaps understandably, and this one's using the Codex version of their detachment, so the transport-focused Firestorm, as opposed to the Vulcan Hestar and Forgefather Seekers. It's the detachment that gives you the advance and shoots, +1 strength within 12 inches, a +1 to wound stratagem, and some good enhancements. Leading the way we have the 2 Salamanders characters. Adrax Agatone joins a unit of Blade Guard. I'd guess he's going with that lieutenant with the Champion of Humanity in that unit as well. That means he'd have lethal hits and rerolling all wound rolls in a very general purpose unit with those Blade Guard, and I guess they'd be charging out of a Land Raider Redeemer to get them into melee. Champion of Humanity allows you to ignore modifiers. Then we've got Vulcan Hestar, who's either joining Assault Intercessors or Infernus Marines here, it would seem. Either of them kind of seem reasonable enough really, as the Assault Intercessors can make Vulcan Hestar reroll his wound rolls. By the way, he can mark targets for rerolling wound rolls with Melters and Flamers. There's plenty of them in this list with those Infernus squads, plus some Eradicators, Land Raider Redeemers, and a pair of Stormspeeder Hammer Strikes he'll also appreciate. He gets tankier with a big feel no pain on mid-board objectives too. Then for the next big combo, there's an Apothecary Biologist with Forged in Battle. That's the one that allows you to flip hit rolls or saving throws and make them into an automatic 6, and he's leading a big squad of Eradicators. That means that you could get some automatic lethal hits for them or pass some saves when you need to. And lethal hits doesn't hurt their damage output as well. They look like they'd be riding up in the other Land Raider to absolutely annihilate enemy tanks, and doesn't hurt they drop down to 90 points per unit of 3 of them now. Then we've got 2 sets of Infernus Marines. It looks like if they wanted to, one of those could also join in the Land Raider Redeemer if Vulcan Hestar isn't going there. They're extra nasty, and Firestorm in any case, being able to advance and shoot and hit with Strength 6 are both quite big deals for them. There's some Intercessors to Sticky Objective, the home field, 2 Invade ATVs with some Multi-Melters also contributing to the heat there. They're nice expendable units for trading and doing secondaries. The Land Raider Redeemers are absolutely massive threats in their own right. Big Overwatch to cook squads that want to take the mid-board objectives. And then finally there's that pair of Stormspear Hammer Strikes. They could be used to ignore cover on units if it made sense, though just in general they can hit the Oath of Moment target really quite hard. Rerolling all hits and a +1 to wound can be very easily one-shotting standard size battle tank type of targets if they manage to get within 9 inches of them. This detachment would certainly help with that. Then there's finally a Combi Weapon Lieutenant to do some skirmishing and mark an objective for some rerolls. Overall looks like an all very fun and fiery list. Nice to see the Salamanders doing well, and lots of units that are so much of a threat that you really can't ignore them here. Given that there were 2 lists that looked like they finished on the same 4 wins and a draw score at that tournament though, I thought I'd also check in on the Victrix Honor Guard and the Blade of Ultramar. This one by an Arian Finnean, and I must admit it looks absolutely terrifying for raw strength. It's basically 3 sets of 6 of the Victrix Honor Guard, with Marnius Calgar and his 2 guards, Cato Sicarius and Uriel Ventris to lead them, so all of those absolutely devastating melee threats, and with loads of movement shenanigans in the Blade of Ultramar. And then just in case you thought that you'd be trying to win firefights against them, there's not 1 but 3 Repulsor Executioners. So just a ridiculous amount of volume fire from those bolt shots, plus some really heavy anti-tank shooting with the laser destroyers, which is a bit wild just how much the dedication is to both the Victrix and the Repulsor Executionists here, rather than more skirmish and medium-sized units. There's only a combi lieutenant, intercessors and incursors to do all the grunt work and do actions and things, so it looks like a list that's going to be trying to deal some horrendous damage to the opponent's army as fast as possible and dominate the primary to stop them running away with score. Next up, we've got the Adeptus Custodes, who had a few points cuts to their Custodian Guard and their Sisters of Silence in the last balance pass, and one list that did well from them was this one by Colin Lopin, going 4 wins to 1 loss at a 32-player grand tournament. This one's using the Lions of the Emperor, so +1 to wound for 1 vehicles that aren't near other friendly units, some good enhancements and plenty of useful stratagems for skirmishing with big golden armour in the midboard. This one goes pretty solidly heavy on the Custodian Guard. There's 3 units of 5 of them and 2 units of 4. So really quite a lot of Custodes on the table here. 30 Custodes plus Sisters of Silence and characters. The Guard are mainly armed with spears, there's 1 shield in each unit, 1 pairing with a Vexilla. There's also a unit of 5 Wardens, and between those units they'll be joined by 2 Blade Champions with a punchy melee and once per game advance and charge for both of them, and 1 by Trajan Valoris. I guess the Wardens will have a character, maybe Trajan himself, and then the Blade Champions go with 2 of the Custodian Guard squads maybe. Another one of the big 5 strong Custodian Guard will be led by Inquisitor Draxus as well, able to use their special rule for their double shooting and rerolls to wound, which greatly help out her own firepower. Then we've got a unit of 3 Alarus Custodians. They went down meaningfully in the last balance update, and they can be used to be split into small units here if you want to have some nuisance interfering deep strike Custodes to do actions and objectives and things. And then to help out more on that front, there's 1 set of 4 Prosecutors, 2 sets of 4 Witch Seekers, again cheaper than they were before, and a Calidus Assassin to jump around the board doing objectives. The Adeptus Custodes can certainly put a pretty massive amount of models on the board these days. There'll certainly be a big potential for squads to either survive or die outright, with all those 4+ invulnerable saves being passed or failed. Before we move on, I'll just give a quick shout out to today's video sponsor in Baron of Dice. They're a high quality dice maker based in the USA. They made some fancy merch dice for the channel and asked to sponsor some videos. Their main offering is to have a vast amount of different dice that you can choose from, ones that should be able to fit in with just about every single faction out there in the game and other war games besides. Their typical offerings being a big chunky fancy dice set with a logo on the one side. You normally get 25 dice for around $38 US or £29 or so. They're based in the USA, so they are a fair bit cheaper to buy domestically, though they can ship worldwide. Most of the options for different factions have multiple different designs on offer, and lots of those designs can have the choice between squared or rounded corners as you might see fit. If you do happen to buy anything from them, they gave me the code Auspex for 5% off, so that could bring down the cost a little bit. They do have some channel merch dice on offer as well, as mentioned. If you want some dice with the fancy channel logo on, they're there as well, and any sales of those help to support the channel a bit. In any case though, a big thank you to them for sponsoring this one, and you can check them out, links down in the video description below. Next up, we've got the Sister Battle. They were one of the armies that seemed to be flying high, at least on the competitive scene prior to the update. They then got a fair few nerfs, including probably going a bit too far on the Retributors. I'm not really surprised to see none of them in this particular list. In any case, for one army that's done rather well since, is this one by Cameron Marinocchio, who went 4 wins to 1 loss at the Portal GT, and using the Hallowed Martyrs detachment, the one where you can resurrect characters on death. And they've got a fair few nice tricks for helping win the melee game, including forcing one enemy unit just to attack one of your models, and potentially leave a much more important unit unscathed. Despite a small points rise, Morven Vahl and her squad of Paragon Warsuits are still in pride of place. They can still absolutely take apart an entire enemy flank between Vahl's rerolls and the +1 to hit and wound Paragon suits get against monsters and vehicles. Provided they get the first strike, they'll be pretty massively deadly, and Morven Vahl is one of the best users of the Revive on Death. There's then 2 units of Celestian Sacrosancts with the Maces, and they're backed up by Hospitallers. That gives you a sort of medium tankiness units to brawl for the midboard. It looks like the increases to the Hospitaller and the big squads there haven't been a turn-off so far. There's a set of Battle Sisters that look like they'll be broken in half by the Immolator, maybe one bodyguarding Junith Arita as she farms up her command point. The other one could run with the Caroness unless they were deciding to just run them completely separate. That one's got the Blessed Blade and Saintly Example, so it could be quite a nice sacrificial model if kept solo. The same is true with the Caroness with the Jump Pack and Halberd. There aren't any Jump Pack units to run, but she can just zoom up the board and hit the enemy rather hard with through suffering strength. If she does get laid low, again, it will be a great choice to revive on death. Then there's a set of cheap and skirmishing Arcoflagellants. There's only one that you could force the opponents to fight if you wanted, or just do some grunt work and screening. 3 individual mortifiers with Buzzblades. quite fast nuisance interference units, needing more than some incidental firepower to take down and can bully some units potentially. And then there's a trio of castigators for some longer range volume fire, with heavy bolters, one with battle cannon and two with auto cannons. They could potentially boost each other's shooting by getting extra AP on their target, and then the second castigator is going to hit far harder than the first. Overall doesn't really feel too enormously changed from the previous Sisters lists. I did feel like most of the nerfs still left the units kind of usable, as they did tend to fall on the things that were a bit more standout, at least some of them. Though again it did feel like they went too far on the Retributors. Next up for the Grey Knights, we've got the Warpbane Task Force. They didn't really have any particularly meaningful changes in the last balance pass, and so far since the Codex, the main two detachments getting played have been the Warpbane Task Force and the Banishers, with the Warpbane seeming to have been doing better for more people. This was the previous year's Grotmus one that focused on the Purifiers. You have the zones of control, and within those zones you get to reroll all your hit rolls. Purifiers can also hand that out as well, and they can get some extra help to deep strike some things in close and hit hard in melee. This list by Kristen Carey won 4 games and lost 1 at the Battle for Ragnar GT, and the most interesting and unusual thing about it is using a Stormraven gunship. So a great big transport with plasma cannons, missile launchers and hurricane bolters, and it will be hitting harder here versus elsewhere due to the rerolls within the zones of control or near purifiers. I guess it should also be used as a staging point for the infantry to get out of. It could be one way to get the purifiers with Castell and Crow into their targets with a whole bunch of incinerators and all that massive amount of cleansing flame. Besides the big storm plane, there's 3 Dread Knights for anti-tank duties. 2 Grandmasters take Sub-Eliminator, Psy Cannon and Big Hammer, and they have the big rerolls in close combats to be able to hit any enemy monsters and vehicles really hard. And then there's one other one that was just listed with Dreadfist. I'd guess that one just didn't have the gear declared on it. They're like this attachment for the damage rerolls on that firepower and melee though. There's also 2 squads of Purifiers, which can hand out the Aura of rerolls and also hit fairly hard in melee as well. They don't take any incinerators on those ones. There's 2 sets of 5 Interceptors with their Jump Shoot Jump. They should be able to get the first strike on enemies and can be a nice unit to skirmish. A Strike Squad for sticky objectives, and then a Calidus Assassin that can jump around the board doing secondaries, and maybe put in the command point debuff aura to good work. Overall it feels like a fairly typical Warpbane Task Force list. The Stormraven gunship feels like the most unusual thing to me. Next up we have the Astra Militarum, and their Grizzled Company detachment seems to have hit the tournament scene pretty hard. This was the Grotmus one that they got from this year, and it feels like the single most powerful out of any of them. The vast majority of people playing Guard have been choosing to use it. You get extra orders on all your officers, and ordered things get some rerolls to hit, and maybe to wound against objective markers. And then you have options for sticky objectives, armour of contempt against shooting, and several ranged damage dealers. This list was used by David Smith to take first at the 83-player Rise of the Empire GT. For Essential Order block, it looks like this one has Lord Solar Leontus and Acadian Command Squad combined together in one unit. They can loiter on the home objective, which will then have sticky objectives, and send out 4 tank orders and 3 regular orders to anything that they need to within 24 inches. So that should be enough to order all the battle tanks, a great big firebase of 3 Leman Russ Vanquishers and a Rogel Dawn tank. One of the Vanquishers takes a triple heavy flamer, but between that's really quite a lot of scary armour to hit the enemy hard, and should be fairly hard to take out at shooting as well, with that Armour of Contempt stratagem as an option. Lord Solar will also keep the command points flowing. Then to range out the front of them, there's really quite a lot of guard melee here. There's the Commissar with Abhuman Detail, which allows him to join the Bulgrin unit, and then he can order that for potentially +1 to hit, and reroll 1s to hit, and maybe reroll 1s to wound as well. It makes them hit significantly harder for a very chunky and tough unit that's hard to take down. And then also for melee, there's 2 big units of 10 Rough Riders, again this attachment being a very nice one for them, giving access to rerolls that they otherwise can't get. There's 2 units of Kazakin who seem to be loaded up into 2 Chimeras. They'll be able to scout those forward and then jump out with rerolls built in from their own special rules. They can strike relatively far with a lot of fairly punchy special weapon fire there. There's Gaunt's Ghosts that can move around the table, both doing secondary objectives and utility things, and they'll also be able to order any regiment things too. And then finally there's just a Cadian heavy weapon squad with some mortars. If they have an order that's spare for them, they again could be potentially re-rolling 1s to hit and wound. In the right matchups, that could actually be fairly big to put the hurt on some enemy light objective holders if they're undercommitted to 1 point. Overall, looks like a really good example of what the new army can do. Kazakin, Rough Riders, Bulgrin and command blocks ordering tanks all seem like pretty strong options here. Just for an alternative take on that one, here's one of the other lists that did well and went undefeated. This one by Ross Small. This one has no Lord Solar and instead takes 2 Dawn Commanders and doesn't go for the Abhuman Detail Bullgrin, but instead goes for a big block of Cadian Shock Troops which will quite like the damage stratagems and an extra set of Katakin. It certainly feels like Guard are going to be one of the armies to beat with this detachment on the go. Next up, we've got the Adeptus Mechanicus, who took some big nerfs at the balance data slate, but the nerfs did fall on the units that you'd probably expect them to, and they were coming from such a position of strength that they're still looking like a big force to be reckoned with. This list by Finley Filippo went 4-1 at Gothic Games Canterbury, a 32-player grand tournament, and he used Halo 3 Battleclade. That's the one where you can mark several units as Halo overrides to get buffs on them, Advance and Charge being one option for that, and has some other nice stratagem support that can do well for plenty of the Admech roster, though in particular it's quite nice for Cataphrons with a Tech Priest Manipulus, and there's one set of those here who takes Sanctified Ordnance for some longer range, and then a whole bunch of Punchy Plasma Culverins with lethal hits, flavours that can fire further, and they'll be a very nice threat for Overwatch as well. Commanding the guns is Belisarius Core himself though. He has the Admech style Oath of Moment, so he gets to mark 1 target, and then he gets to reroll all hit rolls against that, and it means that you can stack really quite a lot of damage buffs there. Big rerolls plus any of the Doctriners that you have on the go, whether it's extra AP or +1 to hit or even +2 in Protector, and then any stratagems that might make sense. You can flex in 2 critical hits on a 5+ if you'd like to. He's also quite big and chunky in his own right, with a big stat line and a punchy melter shot up close, and the ability to self-repair. For the battle line, there's 2 sets of 10 Skitarii Rangers. They're always helpful for getting the extra bit of the Doctriner on the go for units nearby. Plus they can sticky the home objective and any mid-board ones they might make their way to. After the points changes last time around, it did seem that they were incentivizing people to use smaller units of the Sicarians. There's 2 sets of 5 Infiltrators. That's still very nice skirmish infantry to start in the mid-board. They can bully their equivalents quite well with their Taser Goads. And there's 3 sets of 5 Rust Stalkers here with the damage 2 weapons with the anti-infantry. They can have a big threat range with their good movement and the option to advance and charge. Then there's a whole bunch of objective skirmishing units, some Skystalkers that can potentially move very far with their move shoot move, Cerberus Raiders with their reactive move to battle for the midboard, and a Servitor Battleclade having a fair few wounds, a little bit of close range shooting, and the ability to do some actions despite advancing. Then finally we've got the really big guns to make the most of Belisarius Core's rerolls and the other Admech buffs. A big squad of Iron Strider Ballistari with las cannons, fairly awesome dedicated anti-tank or monster fire there. And then 3 Scorpius Disintegrators, which I'm sure will be even more of a mainstay than they were before, given the Iron Striders went up in cost. Their Theramite cannons are very nice against tanks and monsters, though between that, Stubbers and Disruptor missiles, they're going to be tearing chunks out of most infantry as well. Overall seems like a well-balanced Admech list, with good focuses both on heavy firepower and plenty of stuff to fight for objectives and do secondaries. For the Imperial Knights, they were seeming towards the bottom end of the 40k meta before the last balance pass, and didn't really get the help that they needed in my opinion. A few shifts of 10 points per some of the Titanic Knights wasn't really ever going to change anything. It might be kind of telling that they're one of the armies that didn't have a 4-1 event performance, but for one example of one player doing well with them, here's one army that managed to win an RTT, going 3-0 at Northeastern War, played by Mr. 123, which I'm almost definitely pronouncing wrong. This one's the Spearhead at Arms, so you have the option to hand out your buffs to 3 different armigers nearby, and the knight that's going to be doing that is the Knight Warden, giving armigers nearby sustained hit spawn and ignores cover, which is pretty much exactly what the Armiger Helverins really want. In that detachment you've got lots of options to boost Helverin fire. Mentor's Pride also throws some reroll hit rolls of 1 into the mix for the ordered units, and you have the stratagem to buff their AP as well. Beyond that, with all the stratagems focused on the little guys, there's another 5 Armiger Warglaves to fight for the midboard, with some pretty reasonable threat both at range and melee. And then to help for objectives, there's a Calidus Assassin to run around the board doing secondaries, and assisted a battle unit split by an immolator into smaller units. That means that you can sticky 1 objective, have 3 units to do further actions, and get another armoured hull on the table as well. Spearhead at Arms certainly seems like one of the interesting detachments for the Knight. Interesting to see no Knight Defender here. I feel like I've often seen them where you have 2 big Knights, ordering the rest of them with small ones. I'm still guessing that Imperial Knights will be in the place where they need a bit of help though, if they're going to compete with most of the rest of the armies out there. Next up we have the Agents of the Imperium, and for them, given that there's quite so small player numbers for them, I thought I'd cycle back to an army list that won a grand tournament prior to the last balance update. I believe that this might be the first grand tournament win for them, unless I'm forgetting something from last year. It was slightly prior to the last balance update, though given that they've not had any nerfs or buffs or anything, it'll still be equally viable now. The list was used by Louis C, who used it to take first at Laran de Warp and getting the big win in early November. The detachment used its Imperialist fleet, so the main competitive one they tend to use when people try and make them work. That allows you to either focus one objective to make your units have better OC and harder to kill on that, or focus down one enemy unit with getting +1 to hit against them. Besides that, they have quite a nice movement shenanigan to move away when they're shot, and several helpful enough options to skirmish with their Voidfarers. As ever, for most of this one, it's generally about board control and having a whole ton of annoying chaff units that can repeatedly score and fight for the mid-board turn after turn. But they also seem to have just enough damage output that you'd have to be wary of a couple of Deathwatch kill teams. There's 2 sets of them with the Thunderhammers, Frag Cannons and Infernus Heavy Bolters, each led by a Watchmaster, and they'll be able to pack enough of a punch to seriously punish enemies that they can shoot and then charge. It seems that one squad of them is getting there in a Rhino, one Watchmaster takes digital weapons for a points filler and a little bit more melee damage, the other one has clandestine operations, which could allow you to infiltrate the Deathwatch if desired, or otherwise just put some other chaff infantry units to infiltrate for cheap. Then beyond the main damage dealers for all the board control infantry, there's 2 sets of Navy Breachers and 3 sets of 6 Voidsmen at arms. At least some of those will be deep striking with a Navigator with the Combat Landers enhancement. There's Inquisitor Draxus, who has a fair bit of psychic firepower and the ability to turn off shooting at longer ranges for her unit. Could be a nice one to have controlling the backfield. There's another Inquisitor with psychic gifts. Again, not too sure of character attachments here, but there's 3 sets of Inquisitorial Agents. I'd guess at least one of those would join some of them. There's Neversaw Assassin, which can be swapped out for the other variants of Assassin here, so you can have the one that you feel like. I'm sure Calidus could always still be useful for being yet another annoying unit that the opponent can't engage with. There's a set of Sanctifiers with all their Handflamer damage, which could roast enemy lighter infantry rather well. A set of 10 Battle Sisters that are split with an Immolator, so you've got sticky objectives units and 2 of them, and then Chimeras for 2 of those Henchmen warbands. These ones equipped with some heavy bolters, so they could fire at a slightly longer range than some. It's certainly a massive achievement to be able to win any sort of grand tournament with Imperial Agents, basically Warhammer 40k on hard mode. You'd absolutely have to be trading out your units for as many victory points as you possibly could get, and feels like this will be a very, very challenging list to play. Finally, for the Imperium, we've got the Divergent Chapter Space Marines, and there were another couple of these where I couldn't find a 4-on-1 event performance. So first up for these guys, we've got the Black Templars, this one listed by an Adam West Manchesterfield, who won a 30-player 3-round event with them. The Black Templars felt like they got some slightly unnecessary nerfs last time around. The Castellan, the Emperor's Champion, and their Repulsor Executioner all going up was rather painful. They're all still very much present in this list though, this one being a Gladius task force, and far more general purpose than the Book Templar detachments that Games Workshop wrote. Being able to advance and charge when you need to is pretty great, access to Fight on Death is nice, as are the reactive moves and other things. For this one, it looks like there's 2 of the Castellan and Martial combos in some sets of Sword Brethren. They'll be able to reroll all hits, get lethal hits on a 5+, so loads of auto wounds, and the Templar Vows give them a +1 to wound for anything that hits but doesn't auto wound the foe. Loads of nastiness there, and then beyond that there's a few more interesting melee combos that are perhaps a little bit less clear where they go. There's an Emperor's Champion with the Honor Vehement. I guess he'd go with one of the sets of Assault Intercessors. He gets on rather well with their wound rerolls, and then beyond that there's Chaplain Grimaldus and an Execrator Chaplain. For those, there's 2 more sets of Assault Intercessors and 1 more set of Sword Brethren. I'm not sure exactly who joins what. Any of the combos would feel at least pretty reasonable. They both enjoy the Assault Intercessor rerolls, though giving advance and charge all the time to that other unit of Sword Brethren would be handy as well. Potentially the more valuable units might be hitching a ride in those Templar Repulsor Executioners. There's still 2 of them there, and despite the shine being taken off them with that 15-point rise, they're still very efficient Templar firepower. Getting a bonus multi-melter and rerolling all hits against things that are near your friendly units do make them significantly more dangerous than others. For some objective support, there's a Combi Lieutenant and a set of Intercessors. The Intercessors can sticky the home objective, the Combi Lieutenant can do his annoying fading thing behind walls, and then interestingly enough there's 2 sets of 3 Eradicators here as well. They went down to 90 points, so I'm sure that sparked a bit more renewed interest in them for people. They could go into Strategic Reserve or hide behind terrain, or potentially again they could use the Templar Repulsor Executioners to get them where they need to be. Potentially that could be a lot of firepower moving up to get a line of sight if they jump out of them. It did feel like the Templars had been dealt a bit of a blow in the last balance pass though. There are 60 points worth of extra points rises in the list, even if there are the inclusion of the Execrator and the Eradicators, which did go down a bit. Next up, we've got an example for the Space Wolves, again a player who's gone 3-0 at a 3-round one-day event, this one by John Harmer. It's quite nice to see a new list using the Saga of the Great Wolf detachment, so this is the Space Wolf Dropmas detachment from this year. It does seem to have gained plenty of interest with Space Wolf players, with a lot of people choosing to give it a go in the Grand Tournament since it came out. This one gives you 3 rounds of sort of combat doctrines for the Space Wolves, re-rolling advance and charge rolls, +1 to hit, and then either lethal or sustained hits in melee, that melee one being particularly helpful, And if you have Logan Grimnar in the list, which basically all the lists will, you can double down on one of them, probably that melee one. Otherwise you have Armour of Contempt here, a reactive move to getting shot, and Space Wolves advancing and charging, plus an interesting one for +1 to wound with a ranged attack. Going through the list itself, and we do have Logan Grimnar. He has his first turn deep strike ability and just quite a lot of stats for the cost. He could jump in with his set of Wolfguard Terminators if he wanted to. There's a unit of them with their -1 to wound and just generally efficient stat lines and take up an aggressive position on the board. Then we've got Bjorn the Fell-Handed. He generates command points. It's just a big, tough and very efficient dreadnought. It was kind of surprising that he got a points cut last time around, really. We've then got a Wolf Priest with the Howlmore enhancement. That's the one that gives you a battle shock test in the fight phase. It might be a bit of a points filler there, potentially. But either way, he looks like he's going to be joining that big unit of Wolfguard Head Takers with Storm Shields, giving them all a +1 to wound the things that they get into close combat with, and then he can threaten to revive them as well if the opponent doesn't manage to wipe out the unit when they attack it. Then this list goes enormously heavy on the Thunderwolf Cavalry. There's 2 units of 6 of them and 1 unit of 3. They'll appreciate the ability to go smashing through walls, which they can do for 1 command point. It means that you could put them at the base of a ruin and have a pretty enormous threat range with them. There's 2 sets of 5 infiltrators that can screen out behind the lines and stop the enemy deep striking. 2 sets of scouts that can seize control of the mid-board from turn 1, and then a pair of gladiator lancers that can go popping enemy armour from a very long range, and can do so without really needing any support thrown their way. Overall, lots of really quite big, scary and dangerous units. I'm sure you could do a fair amount of blocking people in with Thunderwolves there, giving them some enormous stat lines to chew through so enemies can't get to the mid-board. Next up for the Deathwatch, we've got this list by Challen Kelly Irvin, going 4 wins and 1 draw at a 60-player grand tournament, and this one using the Blackspear detachment. Deathwatch didn't really have too many changes in the past balance pass, the biggest ones being an increase to the Indomitor kill teams, though they still seem efficient enough, though in particular getting a nice points decrease on the Stormspeeder Thunderstrike, so only 135 points if you want to mark vehicles and monsters for your kill teams to wound better in the shooting phase. For the core of the list, there's 5 main big kill team damage dealers, 2 Indomitor kill teams, one led by a Gravis captain with the Tome of Ectoclades. They've got some really quite fearsome mid-strength firepower. The Tome of Ectoclades will allow you to get Oath of Moment for rerolls against 2 units once per game, and the Gravis captain's free stratagems can be handy as well, particularly if you want to use the Teleportarium or the special issue ammo stratagems to affect multiple kill team units. They'll certainly enjoy the mission tactics buffs and the special issue ammunition on all their mid-strength firepower. Then there's a set of Deathwatch veterans with heavy thunderhammers, infernus heavy bolters and frag cannons. It looks like they'd either be led by the Watchmaster with the Beacon Angelus or the Judas here with the Thief of Secrets. I'm genuinely not too sure what the idea is there. The Watchmaster could again have you discounted stratagems, and rapid ingressing that big unit would be a big deal. But on the other hand, the Judas here and the heavy thunderhammers fighting first is absolutely enormous, and the Thief of Secrets make them into a melee powerhouse. I'm not entirely sure which way round that would go, but looks like the other character would join the Assault Intercessors, and they'd be able to chip in with their rerolls either for Guardian Spear melee or to reroll with the Thief of Secrets. Then there's 2 sets of 5 Deathwatch Terminators. They get triple Cyclone missile launchers, so lots of pretty heavy hitting mid-strength firepower there, and the rest have Power Fists and Storm Bolters. There's that Stormspeeder Thunderstrike that can mark targets for any of those shooty kill teams, and then a whole bunch of Space Marine small unit objective support, Intercessors for sticky objectives, Jump Intercessors with their deep strike and generally efficient stat lines, a set of Incursors for hitting 1 target on a 2+, plus being a nice enough skirmish squad, a Combi Lieutenant for their cheap lone operative and movement shenanigans, and then an Allied Ministorum Priest who looks like they're just there as a super cheap unit that could be used as an Ares Nile person or maybe put into strategic reserve to do secondaries perhaps. Looks like a very solid Deathwatch list though. I'm certainly not surprised to see the Stormspeeder Thunderstrike in there. Next up we've got the Blood Angels, and they've done rather well with their Rage Cursed Onslaught detachment so far. This one's their new Grotmus one, which focuses more around their Death Company, giving you extra attacks and some rerolls in melee, even more attacks if you're battle shocked, and some really quite interesting stratagems, sticky objectives in death, advance and charge, and a nice melee damage dealer for extra strength and AP that can also trigger your battle shock and get you hitting with even more attacks. Blood Angels have won no less than 2 grand tournaments already since the Balance Pass, which is a strong start. This one by Matt Charles won Darwinter War. It starts with 2 enormous units of Jump Death Company here, one with Lamarties and one with a Jump Chaplain. That Chaplain takes the Master of Red Thirst to threaten the fight first. Particularly with any stratagems on the go, there should be a really good chance they kill what they need to. Then there's 3 units of Sanguinary Guard with the Spears, which make more sense in this detachment as the Lance keyword can't be got elsewhere, and it seems that one of those is led by Commander Dante, and then the other 2 by Jump Captains, one of which takes the Angel's Fang for the sustained hits too, Again, they're going to be some serious melee threats, and the captains can allow them to use some free stratagems, so easy access to advance and charge, or submitting to the Red Thirst and getting battle shock when they need to for yet more attacks. Then there's 3 sets of jump intercessors, fairly staple for the Blood Angels there, able to move fast and hit hard with a bunch of mortal wounds when they want to. Intercessors to sticky the home objective, and then 2 Bile Predators with Flamestorm cannons and heavy flamers. Pretty nice tanks to skirmish for the midboard, able to roast some enemy infantry and provide a little bit of range support, and also tough enough that you'll need to commit some actual units if you want to take them out. Overall, certainly feels like a pretty terrifying list to be playing against. There's 5 enormous damage threats there that can probably get the first strike on you. They've got really big threat ranges or the ability to rapid ingress, a fair bit of small unit support for objectives and trading beyond that. That wasn't the only rage-cursed onslaught that did well recently as well. This list by Innes Wilson won another GT. There's certainly a fair bit of overlap between them. 2 big blocks of the Death Company once again, and 3 sets of 3 guard with the spears. The biggest difference being trading out some Bile Predators for the Death Company Dreadnoughts though, which is pretty fun. It's really quite cool to see them get some success on the competitive scene given how rarely they're taken. Finally for the Imperium, we have the Dark Angels. Again, they seem to have been off to a relatively good start with a few lists performing really quite well for them. Jonathan Arkin of Happy Crumping Wargaming won an event at the Safeties Off charity GT, and he used the Wrath of the Rock for this one, so -1 to wound the majority of the list if your strength is greater than their toughness, and some fairly powerful abilities beyond that, being able to get +2 strength on your shooting, which would be rather nice for the Desolation squad here, and the potential to charge out of sequence so the opponent has to really step back from all the big melee threats here, unless they want to wind up in close combat. The really big melee threats, there's 2 sets of Deathwing Knights with maces and great weapons, and Lionel Johnson as well. Very nasty, scary units, particularly if they're supporting themselves with the threat of heroic intervening against enemy units trying to charge them. The Lion's going to be a really problematic unit to try and deal with for melee armies out there, given that he has fights first. One of the Deathwing Terminator squads also has an Ancient in there, allowing the Deathwing Terminators to deep strike into an aggressive position and take up residence on a mid-board objective. Then there's another absolutely enormous melee threat with Azrael and 6 Inner Circle companions. They'll enjoy his sustained hits and his 4+ invulnerable save, and Azrael's always going to be good value in his own right, providing the command points as well as all the other stuff he does. There's a Gladiator Lancer, meaning that enemy tanks and armour can't really relax, and the opponent's got to worry at least a little bit about exposing things to your shooting. There's that Desolation squad that looks like it's taking the place of some Intercessors camping the homeboard objective. It should be able to do a fairly good job of streaming out enemy objective holders, and against the right targets you could spend the 1 command point to put their Castellan launchers up to strength 6. There's 2 sets of scouts to screen and fight for the midboard and do some objectives and be expendable. 1 set of Plasma Inceptors with their close deep strike option that could be good both for secondary objectives or getting the alpha strike on something important, and some good lone operatives with a combi lieutenant and his skirmishing, and a Callus's assassin being able to jump around doing secondary objectives. Overall feels like a nicely balanced Dark Angels list. I feel like the Deathwing Knights and Lionel Johnson are always going to be pretty intimidating against just about any army skirmishing for the midboard. They've got a lot of really good small unit support and some other damage threats beyond that. For another Dark Angels list that did well recently, there's also this one that plays second at the Rise of Empire GT. Again, it's using the Wrath of the Rock, though a fair few different choices here. There's a big unit of Hellblasters that'll be quite fun to push up to strength 10, 2 small units of the now 80 points Black Knights that feel really quite efficient on paper. And interestingly enough, despite the points increase, there's 2 sets of 3 Devastator Centurions. Really quite scary, if fairly slow firepower there. Moving on from the Imperium to the Forces of Chaos, next up we have the Chaos Space Marines and this Fellhammer Siege Host list, played by Nick Doots Toomey, and he went undefeated at that same Rise of the Empire GT with 4 wins and 1 draw. It's really quite unusual to see the Fellhammer Siege Host doing well in tournaments. It's generally considered to be one of the weaker ones with its limitations. Its core rule does make your units tougher with a -1 to wound against things that are higher strength than your toughness, kind of similar to those Dark Angels, but a fair few of the stratagems just aren't really quite as helpful as you might hope for. Quite a few really quite niche or situational things. There's one to make some charges longer, bouncing back some damage and mortal wounds, and maybe the most reliable one being a 5+ feel no pain against ranged attacks, though it doesn't work in melee unfortunately. As a result, it's really quite cool to see it doing well on the tabletop. It looks like quite a lot of the list is basically built around 3 pretty huge melee blocks. There's a 10-man squad of Terminators that would certainly be quite a nice choice for that 5+ feel no pain against shooting. They're led by a Terminator Lord with the Bastion plate, which allows you to cancel out a failed save each turn. potentially saving a Terminator's life each time it's used. There's then Fabius Bile, who I'd guess would join the big 10-man squad I've chosen. It's not the only option, but that would be the way that would make his enhancements go the further. Otherwise it could be Abaddon the Despoiler leading them. It'd be a choice between that 10-man block of them or the 5-strong squad. In any case, each of those units is really quite beefy, very dangerous in melee, and they're unusually hard to take down in this detachment. Then supporting them there's Vashtor the Archifane. He's a Demon Prince with some really quite good stats for the cost melee-wise and defensive-wise. And he can potentially buff that Forge Fiend to get that triple Ectoplasma Cannon up to strength 12. There's Lord Discordant on Hellstalker, again with quite a good efficient stat line, and he gets +1 to wound enemies on objective markers, and then a bunch of small unit objective support. Cypher as a fighty lone operative who can hit surprisingly hard with those pistols, a fast-moving Chaos Biker squad with Power Fist and Plasma Guns, a Cultist mob which could sticky objective the home point, and then a set of Traitor Guardsmen with a little bit more OC and cover on objectives. Overall certainly feels like a very unusual Chaos list, definitely a lot of power with those big 3 central melee threats that are going to be hard to take down, but it does feel like an army that's doing well in spite of the challenge of the detachment as opposed to because of it. It is very cool to see someone make it work though. Next up for the Death Guard, we've got this Champions of Contagion list. This one's by Jensen Simmons, who placed 3rd at the Rise of Empire GT, again going 4 wins and 1 draw. Champions of Contagion is the Death Guard detachment that's all very focused on characters and leaders, and if it makes sense to, you can vary your play turn on turn, depending on whether you want some extra AP or -1 to hit. There's a big 2 command point stratagem to reroll all hits and wound rolls for some enormous damage. The ability to fight first for 1 command point for a Death Guard unit with 2 characters attached, and just getting critical hits on a 5+ when it makes sense. That's pretty punchy on a Death Shroud Terminator unit along with a Lord of Contagion. That's a lot of sustained and lethal hits there. The biggest, most central combo is a big unit of 10 Plague Marines with 2 attached characters. They've got a Biologist Putrefier and a Malignant Plague Caster. Enormous amounts of damage with their critical hits on 5s, and then basically getting sustained and lethal hits on all of those. The Rhino gives extra buffs to their shooting when they jump out of it, and both characters can fire with ranged attacks too. If the opponent goes close enough to them, they should be able to deal about as much damage as you could want. Then we've got a whole bunch of Death Shroud Terminators, 1 big unit of 6 of them, and then 2 units of 3. And 2 of the 3 squads are led by Lords of Contagion. Interestingly enough, there's a Death Guard Land Raider here. Unless that's literally just being for tanky fire support, then I'd guess that at least some of those Terminators are getting into battle via the Land Raider. I'm not 100% sure what the idea is with that one. You kind of rarely see them, given that the Death Shroud can deliver themselves into melee quite well themselves, dropping 6 inches away from things that are afflicted. It could be another way to get a unit into the mid-board though, or potentially allow them to embark on it and get a bit more mobility after they've dropped and killed something. That's a huge amount of punchy damage though, and they'd be good targets for just about any stratagems. Beyond that, there's 2 Feated Bloat Drones with the heavy blight launchers, lots of very punchy damage 3 firepower coming out of those, 3 sets of 10 Poxwalkers to thoroughly take control of the mid-board and push out contagions when you need them, maybe to help out the Death Shroud dropping, and then a lone Tallyman sat in the backfield farming up command points. Certainly feels like a slightly different Death Guard list this one. The Land Raider feels like by far the most unusual choice out of them. Otherwise that's not the only player who's been having a good time with Death Guard recently. Here's a Virulent Vectorium list by Gabriel Nixon. This one interestingly takes multiple Malignant Plague Casters and quite a lot of Plague Marines. You can have Malignant Plague Casters in multiple small squads as well as the big one. The Rhinos can transport them into battle and they could fire out of the top hatch of those. And then they've got a lot of demonic firepower in support, 2 Predator Destructors, 3 Feated Bloat Drones and a Mephitic Blight Hauler, plus a Demon Prince with a Revolting Regeneration. Next up we've got the Thousand Sons. They've been hit very hard in the previous balance pass, though despite that the people still playing them still seem to be doing alright, at least on paper by the Grand Tournament numbers. And in the last balance update, Games Workshop gave them really quite a lot of small points cuts to a bunch of units, maybe not adding up to huge amounts for any one squad, but over the course of the army might give you a few more points to play with. One list that did well for them was this one by Tom Hicks, going 4-1 at the Battle of Ragnar GT, and this one's using the Rubricae Phalanx. Ever since Games Workshop actually made these Scarab Occult Terminators a fair bit more worth it, this one's had more interest. They get +1 saves against damage 1 attacks, though the main advantage is in the stratagems and enhancements. They've got access to a big 2 command point, -1 damage 1. They're able to fall back and shoot and keep that warp fire firing. You can get the assault keyword for warp flamers to get them in range, and a few other cool tricks. This list in particular goes really quite heavy on the Scarab Occult Terminators, 1 big block of 10 of them and 2 sets of 5, and they've got 3 Terminator Sorcerers to lead them. They can make them hit with a fairly serious punch, getting lethal hits and a +1 to hit in the shooting phase, plus contributing their own damage at range and melee. One is the Lord of the Rubricae as well, so it gives you a +1 to hit in melee as well. I guess that would make sense to have that on the big units. Then there's an on-foot Demon Prince, which can give out nearby units the stealth keyword. They have Arcane Thralls to give you reroll battle shock tests as well, if that matters. It's only 5 points. And then to back up the bigger Terminators, there's 20 Ultramarines with Warp Flamers and Soul Reaper cannons, one big squad of 10 and 2 sets of 5, and one of the squads gets led by an Exalted Sorcerer, giving your unit a 4+ invulnerable save and regenerating models. And he also has Risen Rubric as well, giving some units the Infiltrate keyword. It could mean that you could put some Warp Flamer rubrics right in the midboard and on objective markers from the start. Then for some objective support and skirmishing, there's 3 sets of 10 Zangors. They can scout forward to screen and skirmish if it makes sense, or also return to reserves. And then 2 sets of the now cheaper Zangor and Lighten with the Great Bows with the small units. Again quite cheap and perhaps a surprising amount of firepower out of a fast moving skirmish style unit, and more so if they can get boosted by any Kabbalistic rituals. In general it's the rubrics and scarabs that would more want that though. That certainly feels like a lot of sorcerer's firepower there, and with good stratagems to support them. I feel like Thousand Suns lists are at least relatively varied within their small roster these days. The vast majority of their data sheets really quite usable, and you can go big on either scarabs, rubrics, or other elements and include Magnus or not. Next up we've got the Emperor's Children, and I thought for this one we'd focus on this Court of the Phoenician army list, though there was one other list that won a grand tournament that I'll mention briefly. This was a Court of the Phoenician list though, with a new Grotma style detachment for the Emperor's Children, and it was played by Michael House, who used it to go 4-1. The Court of the Phoenician does seem to have been interesting enough to get a lot of people trying to play it. The main detachment rule gives you a +1 strength and +1 AP, so a nice enough damage boost on the charge, particularly for the Infractors and their Lord Exaltants, and then several other stratagems are nice enough as well. The Noise Marine one is particularly punchy, with a +1 strength and extra AP, and Fulgrim has a couple of options that he gets discounted, the ability to break through walls, or reroll all hits and wounds versus character units in melee. There's also a nice durability one and a surge move. It's cool to see Fulgrim in pride of place and actually doing pretty well on the competitive scene. This detachment does give you some slight special reason to run in with those discounted stratagems, which to be honest he does feel like he needs a bit really, so it seems like it's more a prop up of his datasheet, where it might not have been the worst idea to have him a bit more efficient on his base stats perhaps. Still very cool to see him on the board though. He's a big scary demon who moves very fast and gets fights first, but if he is just out in the open, the opponent does have the potential to shoot him down. With the points changes to Demon Princes, it looks like a Foot Prince has made it into this list. He improves AP of units nearby, so potentially you could have things like those Infractors getting all the way up to AP3 in this detachment, which is pretty big. And he takes the Spirit Sliver enhancement as well, which gives him extra strength and extra attacks. And again, with the detachment rule, that's going to have him punching really quite hard personally. There's then 3 sets of the Lord Exaltant with the Infractors, loads of volume attacks from them, and some lance attacks with the Lord Exaltant. They all have lethal hits from his special rule, potentially re-rolling some wound rolls from the Infractors, and the Lord Exaltant gets his big boosted attacks turn. One of them has the Soul Stain made manifest, an enhancement for handing out some battle shocks in the fight phase. Then there's one set of Tormentors that can either infiltrate or sticky objectives depending on what makes more sense, and Mauler Fiend which maybe has a bit more use here with the option to smash through walls. There's also the Demonic reroll charge stratagem that he could use too, and then there's 2 Chaos Rhinos that can transport the 3 sets of 6 Noise Marines to battle. 2 of them are attached with a Lord Cacophonist. It's always nice to have some high powered ignored cover sonic shooting. The Lord Cacophonist makes them more efficient, and then that +1 strength and extra AP at range stratagem. That can be a really significant damage boost against a good range of targets. It's nice to see that they've managed to make the new detachment for the Emperor's Children interesting enough for people to play. Looks like he's got enough going for it that it does look like some people are interested over coterie of the Conceited. I do wonder which ones will win out longer term. Talking of the coterie though, here's a list that won a grand tournament there. This one was by Oliver Jawara, placing first at a 32-player grand tournament, and this one going with the triple Demon Prince with wings with all those mortal wound impact hits, and then 3 sets of Noise Marines and Lord Exaltant with Infractors once again. Finally, for the Deity Legions, we've got the World Eaters and a Berserker Warband, and this one was used by Harley Scully to take first at the Battle of Ragnar GT, going 5-0 at a 32-player tournament. The World Eaters did feel like they had some slightly painful changes last time around, points nerfs to the Lord on Juggernaut, Slaughterbound, and the Helm of Brazen Ire. There was definitely a bit more negatives than positives. Given they didn't really change the detachments around though, it's still going to be the Berserker Warband on top, extra strength and attacks on the charge, plus some nice stratagems to support berserkers getting where they need to be, an extra AP one and sticky on death, and the enhancements are still good even if either they or the things that go on them are more expensive now. There's the Demon Prince with the discounted stratagems, and he's still taking the Helm of Brazen Ire for some extra durability, and there's a Lord on Juggernaut despite the big points increase, making the berserkers move 10 inches with his special rule, and he takes Battle Lust, allowing you to reroll charges for a bit more reliability to deliver them into melee. That unit's pretty terrifying with just the sheer amount of volume attacks that he can put out, particularly on the charge, and it's extra nasty with the possibility for big surge moves. Then there's Khan the Betrayer with his reroll ones to hit and wound, and he goes with a unit of 10 Khorne Berserkers in a Rhino. Very fearsome damage for the points cost once again. There's 3 sets of 2 Spawn that are staples in the vast majority of World Eater's Berserker Warband lists. They move really fast, are adequately tough that they're not so easy to take down for any one skirmish unit, and can hit surprisingly hard. There's 3 sets of 3 8-bound, 1 regular unit that can scout up the board, and then 2 Exalted that can tear apart tanks and vehicles, and maybe Deep Strike or Rapid Ingress. A Slaughterbound would go with one of those, maybe one of the Exalted units that you could change it around. There's a set of 10 Jackals to mark sticky objectives, and a set of 8 Goremongers that can infiltrate into the midboard. They got cheaper at 75 points. I feel like the majority of lists will probably take them now. Despite a few points increases, doesn't feel so enormously different to Berserker Warband lists being run before. Feels fairly similar with a good mix of plenty of Khorne Berserkers, maximal spawn, and then a good few units of 8-bounds, the Demon Prince on foot, and a good few units of 8-bounds to back them up. Next up we've got the Chaos Knights and their Infernal Lance, this one being a list that went 4-1 by Nathan Princey. For their balance changes, they bumped the cost on the Knight Despoiler and particularly its dual Gatling cannons, and then had a few small points decreases for other things. It felt like it was probably going to be a net loss to Chaos Knights though, given that they basically nerfed the strongest Knights, but it still looked like it was probably going to be the strongest in Infernal Lance on paper. This one definitely seems to attest to that. Looks like there's 3 sets of dual Gatling Despoiler here. The ability to put lethal hits on those Gatling cannons just make them pretty well anti-everything gun turrets, fully able to obliterate lighter infantry, and they can double down on that with sustained hits, but getting lethal hits means they can also threaten tanks and vehicles rather well. You can also flex into ignoring cover or have enhancements for the assault keyword in this detachment. Having access to Diabolic Bulwark to protect the Chaos Knights is also quite a big deal too. They should be able to win plenty of firefights between them, and then to fight for the midboard there's 3 War Dogs and a whole bunch of Demons. There's 2 War Dog Carnivores with Slaughter Claw and Havoc Pod. They're fast, efficient and fairly ferocious fighters to be somewhere on the front line, and then a War Dog Stalker with its Scout keyword, this one taking a Demon Breath Spear. Then there's really quite a lot of Demons, 3 Beasts of Nurgle that can scout forward. They're quite nice nuisance units and can ping back to full health if not fully killed. Quite nice to skirmish with their equivalents elsewhere. There's 2 sets of 3 Nurglings for cheap infiltrators and screening, or maybe deep striking if desired, and a set of 10 Plague Bearers that can stick at the home objective, and maybe move out into the midboard later game if it should make sense to, if they don't just need to guard the home point. Overall still looks an intimidating list by my book. Those 3 Knights still have absolutely awesome damage output, and they've got lots of units to help them win the overall mission objective game besides that. But it is a bit weaker than before. You'd be able to pick up another set of Nurglings or upgrade something into something else. Finally, for the ranks of Chaos, we've got the Chaos Demons, and since Games Workshop changed up the Lord of Change profiles, these have shot to become perhaps one of the most central greater demons in the index. One example of them doing well is this Scintillating Legion list by Jordan McGregor, which went 4-1 the previous weekend. The Lords of Change and Kairos Fate Weaver went up in points a little bit, but got quite a nice damage boost. Their main psychic shooting going up to damage 3, and their secondary shooting getting an 18-inch range as well, and between that it tips the balance rather well at dealing with a whole bunch of targets that they otherwise wouldn't have been that efficient into. Fate Weaver is also able to fire out a line of sight, which is rather handy, and one of the enhancements that the Lord of Change can take is the Infernal Puppeteer in this detachment, giving you the ability to draw line of sight from a different Tzeentch unit. It means that you don't have to expose all of them if you don't want to. The army that's being used is the Scintillating Legion. This one's the rather delightfully unusual Tzeentch one, where you can basically bounce flux tokens between either players, plugging them into various rerolls. They can also be expended to charge up your stratagems as well. In particular, they have Pyrogenesis, which has 1 command point and 1 flux token to give you +3 strength and +1 AP. It's very nice to make one of those hit just extra hard when needed. Perhaps the other really powerful stratagem is the ability to return to reserve, and you can potentially have 2 different units vanish off the board, even if they're in melee as well, which is very unusual. So multiple Lords of Change warping around the board and blasting the enemy with magical firepower from a wholly different angle. Then beyond that, there's Be'lakor. He'll keep the army shielded, so the core of your force won't be able to be shot from long range, which is quite a big deal. He's got plenty of might in his own right and a bit of his own psychic shooting. And then there's a Demon Prince with wings, which can hit rather hard with the Neverblade. That's a 20-point enhancement that just generally levels him up. +2 to strength and then +1 to attacks and armor penetration. With all the focus on the big guys, it doesn't really leave too much room for the smaller ones. There's only 2 sets of 3 flamers and 2 sets of 3 screamers to do some utility and action style things. They might be able to have a good chance of bullying some enemy lighter infantry or marines or something as they go about their business though. That's really quite a lot of magical firepower and might with so many big greater demons on the board. If they're not able to bring their firepower to bear though, it might give them problems with the mission with having quite this few models. It's definitely be a list that you need to play super carefully with some pretty big options between things like indirect fire things and warping around the board. It certainly looks like Tzeentch demons are in a bit of ascendancy. They also managed to take down a different grand tournament with one called the Portal GT, and another one of these placed 3rd last weekend as well. For another example as well, there's one from the week before. Matt Aspinwall's take on this placed 2nd at a 25-player grand tournament. Again, perhaps somewhat similar here. The big difference is a Bellicor being dropped, swapping to a Foot Demon Prince with a different enhancement, and having some more small unit support with more Screamers, Flamers, and Lone Tzeentch characters. Moving on though, let's get on to the Xenos, and first up we have the Aeldari. Aeldari felt like they were the army that perhaps lost out the very most out of any force in the last balance update. They've been rather mono-build with their Aspect Warrior list, and a huge chunk of their staples had gone up in points cost, and they hit the big 10-strong Fire Dragons combo with Fugun and a Wave Serpent in multiple ways, though the most impactful was being unable to jump back into the transport after shooting something. From my first look, I couldn't see any list that had gone 4-1 at a grand tournament. So here's a player who managed to win a one-day event with Aeldari, Beast Knight placing 1st at Centurion Christmas, and this one hasn't really changed up the formula too much on previous Aeldari lists, going for a very similar sort of aspect spam list as before. The detachment's aspect host, so all your aspect warriors get some rerolls when they're attacking, and there's a nice ranged damage dealer stratagem amongst others, and otherwise the list is pretty identical to the Eldar meta list that were doing well before this. Fugun with 10 Fire Dragons in a Wave Serpent, Jane Czar with some Howling Banshees, and Lycus with some Warp Spiders, multiple small units of other Warp Spiders and Swooping Hawks to run around bullying infantry and doing secondary objectives, some cheap and expendable Rangers for the midboard, joined here by a unit of Striking Scorpions as well. There's 3 sets of 5 Dark Reapers with Tempest launchers, and then for this one an extra squad of Howling Banshees with an Executioner. I must admit, after the rules changes though, Fugun and the Fire Dragons in that big Serpent just feels like a lot of commitment for a unit that then could just be hanging out in the open to get shot down. I guess you might have to fire and fade them behind terrain rather than into the safety of a transport perhaps. It still definitely shows that you can have pretty well the same unit choices that you had before, though just sacrificing a bit more support than you would have had otherwise. I'd guess that after a bit more innovation, some other builds might start to shine through a bit for the Aeldari. It'll be interesting to see what they wind up being if so though. Next up we've got the Drukhari, and in particular the Witch Cult Drukhari seem to be having a great time of it at the moment, winning not 1 but 2 grand tournaments since the data slate already. The Spectacle of Spite seems to be pretty well cemented as their strongest attachment now, with lots of people having good success with it. This one's the Witch Cult focused one, where you have the choice of combat drugs to flex into each turn, getting you things like extra movement or various flavours of extra damage, and you can risk it for 2 if you'd like to. Beyond that, there's quite a lot of stratagems for getting into combat with your witches and hitting hard when you get there. They've got lethal hits and extra AP for witch squads, a fights on death option, and a 2 command point ability to charge the enemy in their own turn, which is pretty massive. That could certainly make it a very tricky prospect to play around multiple disruptive witch units which have probably moved right up into your face, given how fast they can go. In any case, one player who managed to win a grand tournament with this was Cody Jairu, who used this to take 1st at Wizard Winter GT. The list has Lilith Hesperax and then 3 Succubi leading squads of witches. Lilith Hesperax does a lot to make a squad just a lot more threatening on their own right, and then the Succubi take 3 of the good enhancements from the detachment. One has extra AP and damage, one unit can't be overwatched, which can be really big against certain opponents, and then one has fights first, which could all be nice enough with charging out of sequence or maybe heroic intervention. To transport them into battle, there's 2 Raiders and 1 Venom. The Raiders can basically springboard the witches into battle, giving them a 6-inch disembark, and then they can move, advance and charge potentially with a pain token. There's also a Venom which can split a unit of witches into 2 smaller skirmish units if desired. Then for the other main witch damage dealers, there's a big squad of 10 Hellions, maybe a particularly nice one for the lethal hits and extra AP stratagem, and 2 more skirmishing squads of 5. There's 2 sets of Scourges with their heavy weapons, able to move, shoot, move, and hit the enemy with Dart Lances or Haywire, likely without getting shot in return. There's a set of the super fast moving Reavers with Heat Lance and Caltrops. They should be able to get where they want to be for secondary objectives or disruption. There's 2 mandrakes with their infiltrate and screening, and then the ability to fade away, a Kronos that can farm up and distribute some pain tokens, and then finally there's Lady Malice, just being played completely solo here it would seem again, having her command point debuff aura, a fair amount of personal melee power, and the ability to redeploy units if you'd like to. Overall it's certainly an army that'd be kind of frustrating to play against, lots of units that are absolutely going to be hitting you first rather than the other way around, with enormous threat ranges or move shoot move, and in particular that charge out of sequence stratagem it could be horrendous to try and play around. Here's another list that won another grand tournament called the Twin Dragons Dragon Cup by Steve Trimble. This one's really quite similar to the previous, instead going for 50 witches rather than 40 and slightly more Hellions and Reavers. It doesn't take as many of the enhancements though, and the points come from the 3 sets of Scourges which are just fully absent in this one, and there's also quite a lot of Venoms to have lots of small witch units running around. For the Tyranids, Games Workshop didn't mess around with too much last time around, just changing the points cost on some Carnifexes. They do have multiple usable detachments and most of their datasheets are solid enough. One list that's done okay for them recently was this Invasion Fleet list by Brandon Whitehurst, placing 4-1 at that Wizards Winter GT. Invasion Fleet is the central adaptation style Tyranid force, where you choose to be good against tanks and monsters or infantry at the start of the game, and then has some fairly nice stratagems where you can flex into those, get 5+ feel no pains, or regenerate a good number of gaunts. In particular, respawning a bunch of Horma gaunts could be a big deal in this list. There's 2 big units of 20 of them and 1 set of 10. That's a lot of very fast moving objective control that could thoroughly go up the midboard, and certainly has enough volume attacks to bully lighter infantry out there. If they're sent out in waves, that could buy you multiple turns of just denying the opponent the primary. For the main damage dealers of the list, there's 7 big shooty monsters, 3 Exocrines for their anti-elite sort of firepower, 2 Maleceptors with their 4+ invulnerable saves and their closer range psychic shooting, and then 2 Tyrannifexes perhaps lurking in the backfield with their rupture cannons, pretty massive and scary but slightly unreliable anti-tank and durability profiles that's going to be a tough nut to crack. Then interestingly there's a set of hyper-adapted Raveners and regular Raveners. I feel like there could be some argument fielding them either separately or together. If separately then you just have the small unit of Ravagers that can burrow around and do secondaries and things, but if you put them all together then you have a pretty enormous damage threat that can rapid ingress. With all of their overlapping special rules they're going to be scary enough to take out most things, but then you have a big 300 point unit with sort of middling-ish durability, probably about to get hit back very hard indeed. Finally, for some objective support, there's a Neuro Tyrant that can boost the Shadow in the Warp and be nice enough for a bit of Torrent Fire and Synapse beyond that, and then a Biovore to farm out its Spore Mines for a little bit of extra board control and helping with certain secondaries. It feels like a slightly more unusual Invasion Fleet list to me. No Central Hive Tyrant or Swarm Lord or any of the Tyranid lone operatives that tend to get so commonly played, but instead just a big focus on lots of little guys to swarm the midboard, and then lots of big guys to deal some big damage behind, and Raveners causing problems elsewhere. Next up, for their cultist servants, we have the Genestealer Cults. They didn't really get anything significant in the balance pass last time around, but doesn't really feel like their factions players have had enormous amounts of excitement to put them on the table recently, at least compared with their past. This list by Eric Tatt managed to break in towards the top tables for them though, going 4-1 at that Rise of the Empire GT, and he's using the Final Day detachment, the one that you can ally in Vanguard Tyranids with. I feel like they often get used for gargoyles to be able to deep strike and then move, shoot, move, or the various lone operatives to be used to get close to the enemy and then line up for the Genestealer Cults to deal some big damage. But as well as those here, there's also some hyper-adapted Raveners here as well, able to rapid ingress in for free and then hit the enemy fairly hard. The Genestealer Cults can be pretty significantly helped out by the Tyranids nearby though. They get a +1 to hit, which will be good for that neophyte hybrid block in this one. There's a big set of 20 of them with their various special weapons and led by Benefactors for some anti-tank shooting and lethal hits. He also grants his unit sustained hits 1 for targets that are nearby Tyranids too, so doubles down on the damage dealing that way as well. Otherwise, beyond the core rule, the detachment has some stratagems to help out melee, one for rerolling all wound rolls with a Genestealer Cult unit, provided there's a Tyranid unit nearby to cheer them on. There's one for a damage buff against a unit that killed a Tyranid unit, and a helpful one to allow you to return to strategic reserve for either half of the army. Benefiting from those here is a real mix of Genestealer Cult units. There's a Patriarch with a big unit that can't be overwatched. I guess he'd go with a big set of 10 pure strain Genestealers for a potentially seriously nasty Alpha Strike, and in particular the V-roll wound rolls one would be quite a big deal for his squad. There's another smaller set of infiltrating pure strain Genestealers that could be a bit more of a normal infiltrating trading unit. There's 2 sets of Metamorphs with the Hand Flamers. They're the ones with the surge moves and again can hit rather hard. It looks like one of those units is joined by a Locust which can give them fights first as well, and that could make them a nuisance to kill. There's 2 sets of Acolytes, one that can rustle up some command points, and another that can deep strike and skirmish with some hand flamers if desired. There's an Abominant with a unit of Aberrants. I'm not 100% sure what their part of the plan is, but a fairly tanky melee threat unit that again will enjoy Tyranid support. Some scouting Athelan Jackals, and then 2 Achilles Ridge Runners with heavy mortars, allowing you to mark targets for extra AP. One of them can also hit something with Ignore's cover as well, with the Survey Augur. Overall feels like quite a fun and well mixed Genestealer Cult army. Lots of different threats here and different tools that you could use for different jobs. Interesting to see a big melee unit with a Patriarch at its head. That and those hyper-adapted Raveners are rather cool ones to see here. And certainly looks like you could get that big buffed neophyte hybrid block up to some fairly silly levels of damage between all the buffs you can stack on it. Next up for the Necrons, they didn't have any changes in the last balance pass. I feel like they've been doing well enough in an upper mid sort of level in 40k currently. Most of their units very playable, and their competitive list tending to mostly either go for Awakened Dynasty or Starshatter Arsenal. This one's an Awakened Dynasty list by Kirby that went 4-1 at that Gashhammer event. Awakened Dynasty being the one that really focuses on characters, lead units get a +1 to hit, and then there's a whole bunch of stratagems that can get very boosted if there's characters in the squad. A nice reactive reanimation one, and the revive a character on death is a big deal as well, meaning that infantry characters can just resurrect after they've been slain, which is useful for a whole bunch of units. Even by Awakened Dynasty list standards though, this one goes absolutely all out on the characters, though a couple of them are C'tan, and basically seems like the list is a very straightforward one. 2 C'tan and 2 maximally supported blocks of Necron warriors heading towards the midboard, with a few support pieces for the warriors hovering around behind them. Necron warriors can reanimate in a really big way. There's 2 big squads of 20 here with Gauss Reapers. One of them takes an extra Gauss Flare. I'm guessing that might be to trigger the Chronomancer's move, shoot, move. To bulk them out further, each squad has 2 Cryptothralls in it as well, so paying a premium for 6 more wounds there and just a tiny bit of melee threat. Both units have a Royal Warden in them, so that allows them to fall back and shoot. One of them gets the Netherrealm Casket for some stealth, and then one of the squads has Oric and the Divider in it, so that'll give you a 4+ invulnerable save, plus his ability to fight big once per game. And the other has a Chronomancer for a -1 to hit, and the ability to move, shoot, move, getting you around the table a bit faster. Then the support for these guys is pretty enormous. There's a Canoptet Reanimator, which I'd guess would ideally be positioned to cover both units. That gives you an extra D3 models reanimated each time they do so, and Necron Warriors get to re-roll those rolls, so you're typically getting something like 4 or 5 models back each time they reanimate. They can do so normally, they can do so reactively with a stratagem. There's a Catacomb Command Barge with a Resurrection Orb that will allow you to put that extra reanimation on one squad once per game. And there's also a Ghost Arc as well, which allows you another reactive reanimation in response to taking damage. One of the lone characters would have to start in there. Overall, basically, if you don't manage to wipe out the warrior squad in one go, there's a good chance it's going to heal back up to near enough full health. Then to rustle up command points and keep them coming, there's Imitate the Stormlord. I guess he'd loiter in the backfield somewhere and do a bit of screening while he's doing that. A Catacomb Command Barge is fairly chunky and hard to take out in its own right, with the Dermal Bond giving it a 4+ feel no pain. Illuminor Seraz is here as well. He's got good stats in his own right. As lone operative near infantry, he'll give the warriors an extra pip of AP and worsen AP against them. And basically between all that, you have 2 of the best supported warrior units out there in 40k. I guess the game plan would be to march onto 2 mid-board objectives and then hold them against all comers for multiple turns. I guess aiming to disrupt that further, there's a C'tan Shard of the Nightbringer. Really big and scary with loads of stats and just hard to ignore, and then Transcendent C'tan that can warp around the table, potentially jumping into the front of the enemy army. Overall, it certainly feels like a very unusual Necron list, dispensing with a lot of staples to go all in on the reanimation thing. Certainly looks like a very frustrating list to play against for a lot of normal things that don't have the ridiculous damage needed to one-shot a warrior block. Otherwise, for a different take on Necrons, here's a Starshatter Arsenal list that plays second at that Twin Dragons Cup, this one by Stephen Ross. As you can see, couldn't really be more different here. No warrior blocks or C'tan whatsoever. Instead going with the Silent King, multiple Doomsday Arcs, a block of Wraiths as another durable thing, and then a bunch of supporting units. It's kind of impressive just how little overlap there is between the two lists, really. Next up, we've got the Orks, another faction that didn't really get changes in the last balance pass. And for their one, we've got a Warhorde by Ryan Brown, going 4-1 at a 24-player GT. Warhorde's by far the most commonly played detachment for the Orks. Getting sustained hits 1 on all your melee violence is quite a nice start, and then there's other good options for getting them to melee, with the +2 to movement enhancement, and the +2 to advance and charge stratagem that they get. They have a -1 to wound stratagem, which is nice on the defensive, and then can flex into more critical hits if you need it. As with most Orky lists at the moment, the big central one to this one is Ghazghkull Thraka with a big unit of 20 boys, kind of hard to turn down for the sheer amount of violence that they can do. Ghazghkull being one of the best units to take down big stuff in the enemy, and then getting a +1 to hit and wound on all those chopper attacks is going to be a massive deal. And in this one there's a pain boy as well with Follow Me Lads. That's the +2 to move enhancement. They've gone for that rather than the big mech giving you a feel no pain as opposed to the advanced reroll. That unit can move a very long way if you use the +2 to advance and charge stratagem in the war, potentially hitting units that are around 22 inches away or more fairly reliably, particularly if there's a command point reroll budgeted. Then beyond that there's loads of dangerous things loaded up in transport. 3 war bosses and a beast boss leading various angry greenskins. The beast boss goes with a beast snagger boys, and he'll be able to do loads of mortal wounds when he's thrown into a tank or monster. The war bosses are leading 2 squads of knobs and 1 set of breaker boys, all getting lots of mid-strength and AP2 multi-damage attacks, extra nasty in the turn of the war, and good into various different targets. Also loaded in those trucks are 2 sets of flash kits, nice relatively cheap skirmishers with a bunch of volume damage 2 fire, and then plenty of damage 1 attacks in melee. Quite good at bullying enemy infantry all around. There's some burner boys that looks like they'd also be able to fit into one of the trucks as a nice cheap extra unit to go in there. 3 sets of 5 storm boys, which means that secondary objectives are covered quite well, and a unit of the mandatory Gretchen to farm up some command points and hold down the home field. Overall lots of good stuff and big melee threats there. Maybe no infiltrators is an interesting choice. You also have more options on that front now with commandos and boss Necrons. Certainly looks like it's done pretty well for them though. Lots of major melee threats where none of them can really be ignored in the trucks. Then of course that enormous almost 500 point unit with Ghazghkull the Pain Boy and all the boys. Next up for the tower, I was interested to see someone putting some Storm Surges on the table to some good success. This list by Daniel Zeri going for one at the Gashhammer end of year GT. 4 changes in the last balance update. Riptides went up a bit, up to 200 points, and the Storm Surges dropped by a fairly meaningful amount down to 360, which felt like they did need that given that they were very rarely seen before. Looks like it's been enough to tempt at least one person to put some on the table. The detachment being used is Montcar, so being able to advance and shoot in the early game and gain lethal hits if you're guided. To help with that, they've also got an automatic 6-inch advance as well. Boosted AP for a 1 command point, a 2 CP -1 damage stratagem in the shooting phase, which could be quite a big deal on some of the big units here. Leading the force there's Commander Shadowsun, a fairly solid lone operative who can provide some reroll 1s to hit and potentially farm some command points, and then an ethereal who can generate some command points as well, and has the Strike Swiftly enhancement, giving you the Scout's ability to some units, which could potentially even have the Storm Surges lumbering forward to get some lines of sight very early between a 6-inch scout move and then their normal move and an advance if you want. The Riptides all have iron accelerators, now at the strength of 10, so are far more of a threat to sort of medium armor style units. They're quite nice to have on the front line as well. If the enemy charges them, they can still just fall back and shoot, which makes them good there. They're also fairly tough. The Storm Surges, for their 360 points, get a whole range of different profiles and guns, cluster rockets and various other small arm weapon systems, and then usually take the big pulse blast cannon shots for 2 enormous shots at damage 12. Pretty scary against enemy super heavies. They are fairly chunky and hard to take down as well. 20 wounds at toughness 11 with a 2+ save and a 4+ invulnerable. Then there's really quite a lot of Pathfinders in this army list. They're 90 points per unit and have some really good firepower for infantry with a whole bunch of ion rifles. 2 of the units infiltrate and 1 has a grav inhibitor drone. There's a set of Kroot carnivores that can sticky objective the home objective, just the 1 set of 5 stealth suits which allows you to mark while also rerolling 1s to hit and wound against that target, and then a single piranha that can rush up the board and maybe do some blocking or secondary style things. That one gets armed with a fusion blaster. Will be interesting to see if we see the Storm Surges in any more regular play beyond this. I'm sure some people will be tempted to put them back on the table with a big points cut. There's plenty of rivals for good tower firepower between all their other units though. In any case, pretty cool to see a big super heavy unit that's been neglected for a while do well. Finally, with a look through our lists from Warhammer 40k, we have the Leagues of Votann, and this one's another army list that's putting some newly cheaper units on the table. This army is a Hearthband won by Drukhari, using it to take first at a 34-player grand tournament in France. Hearthband's their previous Grotmas detachment, and it gives you a nice straightforward damage buff as its core rule, rerolling wound rolls of 1. And Hearthguard also gets to improve the AP of their attacks, making them quite a lot more efficient here. They'll all be shooting with AP -4 plasma guns, better AP on their grenades, and better in melee. Beyond that, the detachment can get you a 4+ invulnerable save for a command point for a Hearthguard squad. You can get a +1 damage against a monster or vehicle unit for 2 command points, Again, pretty great on a masked up Hearthguard unit. The Hearthguard can get an extra pip of strength and sustained hits 1 if you spend a yield point, and there's an option for a 6-inch deep strike as well. With all the things that help out Hearthguard, there's 3 big units of 10 of them here. They all take the plasma guns, the concussion gauntlets, and the hammer and teleport crest, so they're able to deep strike. At least 2 of the squads won't have any leaders. The other one, Uthar the Destined, could join unless he wants to loiter in the backfield. He could be useful enough to hand out some free stratagems to these guys though. Beyond the central element of the list though, the rest of it feels really quite unusual. Despite only having a few units to transport, there's no less than 6 Sagitors here. They drop down very slightly from 95 points to 90 points, but maybe not to the extent where I'd really expect them to be jumped into being spammed again. I guess to give you the option for a fair few transport shenanigans with the small units here, there's 2 sets of 5 Chthonian Berserks able to jump out and hit some enemy heavies rather hard with the concussion mauls, and then to just have things to be able to transport and the other 4 of them as dedicated transports, you need to start all the characters there. So Lone Operative Buri Agneson, the 2 Arcanist Evaluators, all of which went down in cost, and then the Memnir Strategist who could maybe farm the yield points on the homeboard objective. Interesting to see the cheaper Lone Operatives seeing some play. The Arcanist Evaluators do feel a lot more acceptable at 65 points versus 75 for what they do, and Buri feels a bit less of a commitment and a lot more feels good for his stats and his revive on death when he's down at 95. Finally, there's a scouting unit of Hernkim Pioneers that could move up to the mid-board in the early game. Overall, it definitely feels like a very unusual Leagues of Votann list. Kind of fun to see some maximal Hearthguard spam and all the Sagittors though. There's going to be a whole load of very high AP firepower hitting the opponent, and the Hearthguard could flex into damage 3 if they need to off some Terminators or tougher targets perhaps. Looks like there'd be pretty scary rapid ingress threats between their shooting and melee as well. In any case, with the Leagues of Votann talked about, that's just about it for this one. Let me know your thoughts or insights as to any of the army lists here. I'm sure I've missed things or I've made a few mistakes in transcribing them. Feel free to let me know down below and I'll post any corrections, and any other insights as to how they play are really interesting. Obviously I didn't make these myself. Thanks to Baron of Dice for sponsoring this one. You can check out their offerings linked down in the video description if you'd like to take a look over their range. They do have a pretty vast amount of dice with offerings that could fit in well enough for a good number of the Warhammer factions out there. And if you do wind up buying anything through them, then use that code Auspex for a 5% off. That's about it for this one though. Feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more like this. I'll certainly aim to keep the regular 40k videos coming, with new ones out just about every day. If you've been enjoying the videos on the channel, Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description below. Channel patrons get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with the chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link's in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.